You are looking at the drawer of doom, and it is the physical manifestation of a multi-billion-dollar headache. Inside that mess are cables for cameras that no longer turn on, printers that died in the year 2010, and proprietary chargers for phones that haven't been sold in a decade. It is estimated that every year, the world generates over 50 million metric tons of electronic waste. A staggering portion of that waste is nothing more than the discarded remnants of obsolete charging standards. This is not an accident of history, but a calculated strategy by the architects of the digital age. For a long time, the tech industry did not want you to have a universal solution. They wanted you trapped in their ecosystem, forced to buy their specific plastic dongle for $30 because the pins were arranged in a slightly different pattern. Before you continue down this rabbit hole of digital archaeology, hit the subscribe button, because understanding how these companies manipulate your wallet is the first step toward reclaiming your freedom. To understand why the arrival of USB-C was a revolutionary act of defiance, we have to look back at the technological dark ages. If you looked at the back of a computer in the 1990s, it didn't look like a consumer product. It looked like the control panel of a Soviet nuclear submarine. There were huge, bulky serial ports for your mouse, and massive parallel ports for your printer that used screws to stay attached. If you wanted to plug in a joystick, you needed a dedicated game port. If you wanted a keyboard, you looked for a circular PS2 connector. None of these things talked to each other. They were islands of hardware, isolated by design. Worst of all, if you plugged something in while the computer was on, there was a good chance nothing would happen. You had to restart the entire machine just to get it to recognize a basic peripheral. This was the era of the victim user, where the consumer was expected to be a part-time IT professional just to print a document. The industry treated compatibility like a luxury rather than a right. It was inefficient for manufacturers and a nightmare for the average person. The world was crying out for a hero, or at least a standard that didn't require a degree in electrical engineering. In the late 1990s, a group of companies finally decided to stop the madness. They introduced the Universal Serial Bus, or USB. It was supposed to be the one ring to rule them all. The classic USB type of connector became a global icon. Suddenly, you could plug in a flash drive or a keyboard without rebooting your life. It felt like a miracle of modern engineering. However, the villains of the tech world aren't easily defeated. As our devices began to shrink, the standard USB plug became too bulky. Instead of sticking to one smaller design, the industry fractured once again. We entered the era of mini USB, then micro USB, and then the strange wide micro B connectors used for external hard drives. By the year 2012, the dream of a universal cable was dead. You needed one cable for your Kindle, another for your digital camera, and a completely different one for your phone. Manufacturers were back to their old tricks, creating a chaotic ecosystem that forced you to carry a bag full of just-in-case wires. The drawer of doom was growing larger, and the environment was paying the price. Then, in the year 2014, the USB Implementers Forum decided to burn it all down and start over. They realized that the previous versions were just band-aids on a broken system. They needed something that could handle everything: power, data, and video. They needed a connector that was small enough for a phone, but powerful enough for a workstation. That was the birth of USB Type-C. On the surface, it just looks like a tiny oval plug. But beneath that smooth metal shell lies a masterpiece of engineering. While the old USB cables had only 4 pins, USB-C arrived with 24. This was a massive technological leap that changed the fundamental nature of how devices communicate. The most famous feature is the reversible orientation. We have all spent far too many minutes of our lives trying to plug in a USB cable, failing, flipping it, failing again, and then realizing the first way was correct. USB-C ended that psychological torture. It doesn't matter which side is up. It is a design that finally respects the user's time and sanity. But the real magic isn't in the shape. It is in something called alternate mode. This is the hidden superpower that allows a single cable to transform its identity. Through alternate mode, those 24 pins can stop acting like a data cable and start acting like an HDMI cable or a DisplayPort connection. This is why a modern laptop only needs 1 or 2 ports to do everything from charging to projecting a 40K movie. This flexibility allowed designers to kill off dozens of ancient ports. It streamlined the manufacturing process and gave us the thin, light devices we use today. But as USB-C began to take over the world of Windows and Android, one giant stood in the way of true universality. We have to talk about the villain of this story, Apple. Apple was in a strange position. They were actually among the first to put USB-C on their MacBook laptops in the year 2015. They knew it was the future. Yet for their most popular product, the iPhone, they clung to their proprietary Lightning connector for a full decade. To understand why, you have to follow the money. By owning the Lightning port, Apple controlled a massive secondary market. Every third-party company that wanted to make a cable or a pair of headphones for the iPhone had to pay Apple a licensing fee. This was the Made for iPhone program, a golden goose that generated hundreds of millions of dollars in pure profit. It wasn't about the technology. The Lightning connector was objectively inferior to USB-C in speed and power. It was about the golden handcuffs. Apple argued that changing the port would create more electronic waste, but the reality was the opposite. By keeping the iPhone on a different cable than the rest of the world, they were forcing millions of people to maintain two sets of accessories. They were protecting their profit margins at the expense of the global environment. The victim, once again, was the consumer who just wanted to borrow a charger from a friend. The stalemate only ended when a higher power intervened. The European Union looked at the mountains of discarded chargers and the thousands of tons of annual e-waste and decided that enough was enough. They passed legislation mandating that by the end of the year 2024, all portable electronics must use a common charging standard. That standard was USB-C. Apple resisted, calling the regulation a blow to innovation, but the law was firm. With the release of the iPhone 15 in the year 2023, the walls of the garden finally crumbled. The iPhone transitioned to USB-C, and for the first time in history, you could use the same cable to charge your MacBook, your iPad, your iPhone, and your Nintendo Switch. The era of the truly universal cable had finally arrived. But don't get too comfortable just yet. In this world, simplicity often hides a new kind of complexity. Just because every cable now looks the same doesn't mean they are the same. This is the new trap for the unwary consumer. You might buy a cheap USB-C cable at a gas station and find that it takes 5 hours to charge your phone, or that it won't show your laptop screen on a monitor. The problem is that the USB-C standard is almost too flexible. Some cables are designed only for basic charging. Others are rated for high-speed data transfer but can't handle high wattage. Some have special e-marker chips inside that tell your device how much power they can safely carry. Without that chip, your 100-watt charger might only give you 10 watts of power. This is the hidden problem that still plagues the market. Two cables can look identical on the outside while being worlds apart on the inside. One might be a high-performance highway for data, while the other is a narrow dirt road. To survive in this new era, you have to be a smart shopper. You have to look for labels like Power Delivery or USB 4. Protecting your wallet means understanding that the cheapest cable is often the most expensive one in the long run. A poorly made USB-C cable isn't just slow. It can be dangerous. Because these cables carry so much power, up to 240 watts in the latest versions, a short circuit or a lack of proper communication between the device and the charger can lead to permanent hardware damage. Despite these nuances, we have reached a technological plateau that was unimaginable 20 years ago. We have moved from a world of 20 different plugs to a world of one. The drawer of doom is finally starting to empty. For the modern traveler, the dream is finally a reality. One brick and one cord to rule all your devices. This journey from the chaotic 1990s to the unified present is a lesson in power dynamics. It shows that while corporations will always move toward proprietary control to maximize profits, the collective will of consumers and regulators can force a change for the better. The universal cable wasn't a gift from the tech giants. It was a hard-won victory for common sense. So how do you navigate this world without getting burned? First, stop buying the cheapest cables you find in the checkout line. Invest in a few high-quality, certified USB-C cables that support power delivery and at least 10 gigabits of data. These cables will stay relevant for years, outlasting the devices they charge. Look for reputable brands that provide clear specifications on wattage and data speed. Second, audit your own drawer of doom. If you haven't used a cable in 3 years and the device it belongs to is in a landfill, let it go. Recycle it at a proper e-waste facility. The goal is to reach a state of cable zen, where you own fewer things, but the things you own actually work every time you plug them in. The technology landscape will always keep changing, but the shift to USB-C represents a rare moment of consolidation. It is a rare win for the user. We have traded a mess of proprietary plastic for a single, sophisticated interface. It might not be perfect, but it is the closest we have ever come to a digital language that everyone speaks. As you look at that small oval port on your phone, remember the history it represents. It is the result of decades of engineering, years of corporate warfare, and a final, necessary push from international law. It is a tiny piece of hardware that solved a massive, everyday problem.